Warning! To those of you who've never played Fire Emblem Awakening before, I would highly recommend that you don't watch the following video, because it contains minor spoilers. By minor spoilers, I mean nothing really too major for the plot, but it is going to spoil all the characters who join in the first generation, well, pretty much all of them, and also some slight plot elements regarding just certain particular developments of the story that, if you played the game, you'll know what I'm talking about, but I'm trying to stay as vague as possible for the purposes of people who haven't. So, again, if you haven't played Awakening, I would recommend that you don't watch this video just yet. This video is more designed for people who already have played the game, just to give them a heads up on what pairings I'll be doing and my personal reasons as to why. In fact, a lot of the things I discuss here won't really make sense to people who aren't familiar with this game or its characters. So again, if you have not played this game before, I don't recommend you watch. Anyway, if you're still here, well, it's time for part 0 of my Awakening playthrough. Now, most of you will know that this game uses the marriage system of Fire Emblem 4. And because of that, there are huge numbers of combinations of who to marry to who in the first generation. Basically, any male can marry any female with some exceptions, and that creates a huge number of possible pairings, and essentially a huge number of possible story outcomes, since unlike Fire Emblem 4, all of these pairings have unique support conversations. There are no crack pairings in this game. No pairings that have absolutely no dialogue with each other at all. Every pairing gets support conversations, with one exception that I'll be getting to later. And of course, yeah, shipping makes a big part of this game, and as a result, the fandom is kind of full of insane shipping wars, which I hope to avoid. I'm just going to stress here that all of these are simply my personal opinion. And that's the reason why I wanted to do this video, because I thought that before we go into the game, I needed to actually give everyone a heads up on what pairings I'll be doing. Mostly because, so people know going into the game already, because I will be working towards the pairings the moment I have both characters available. And secondly, just to give my reasons for doing these pairings, my personal reasons, and so that whenever I'm actually in the playthrough, I don't need to explain why I'm going for these pairings, because I've already got all the explanation out of the way before I even covered the game itself. So basically, if anyone ever asks me, why are you doing this pairing, I'm just going to link them back to this video, because this video will hopefully explain all of that. Now, again, I stress that all these pairings are purely my personal opinion, and really, that's what I feel is the biggest part of pairings in Fire Emblem Awakening. Personal opinion. The reason for this is, unlike Fire Emblem 4, well, I mean, okay, now if you know Fire Emblem 4, you will know that pairings affected the children characters, and sometimes it could be pretty drastic. You made the wrong pairings, and you could miss out on legendary weapons, or make some of the children useless, having the wrong skills, having terrible growth rates. That is not the case in this game. In this game, there are no bad pairings. Sure, pairings do affect stats of the children in gameplay to some extent, but it's nowhere near as drastic as it was in Fire Emblem 4. Basically, the differences between optimal and slightly less optimal pairings are far more subtle than they were in Fire Emblem 4. Basically, it's impossible to ever go wrong with pairings in Awakening. It is impossible to screw up the children. In fact, due to the way the inheritance system works, the children will always end up better than their parents. So, really, you can't go wrong. And that's why I stress that, at least to me, pairings in Awakening are pretty much a matter of personal opinion more than anything else. Yeah, sure, there are some pairings that are technically slightly more optimal than others. I don't care about that, because unlike in Fire Emblem 4, like I keep saying, the differences are much more subtle this time. They're not as dramatic as FE4. Like, again, FE4, it was possible for some of the children to be completely worthless. That is not the case here at all. So, and because of that, if you don't do the same pairings I do, this is nowhere intended to be at all a kind of, you have to follow the same pairings that I do, otherwise you'll suck. No, this is again purely my personal opinion, and the reason why I'm doing this video is because I know that my personal opinion is going to be different from a lot of other people. The big thing about Awakening is that everyone's personal playthrough will be completely different, and that's a great thing about this game. So, I wanted to share what my personal playthrough, just an idea of what it's going to be like. And yes, now I'll also say, most of these pairings are pairings that I made in my very first playthrough as well. Generally because when I'm showing off this game, I want to show my personal favourite pairings. So, like, while I could go for other ones just for more diversity, I do really want to talk about my personal favourite pairings in this game, and that's why I'll be going with most of them. However, there are some that will change a bit, because I'm going to be playing with a female avatar this time, and if you've seen the previous video, you'll probably understand why. Now, I'll talk about that more a little later, but basically, don't get offended at all about it. Naming a female avatar Mary Sue is in no way intended to be a jab at female Robin or anything like that. It's just purely an in-joke that started with me from Fire Emblem 12 Heroes of Light and Shadow. The moment that I saw there was a character customization system, I thought, you know, wouldn't it be hilarious if I had a female one named Mary Sue and just treated the whole thing like a self-insert fanfiction? I just thought it would be funny, so basically, it's being done purely for comedic reasons. It is in no way an attempt to bash the character at all. Now, because I'm not using a male avatar, that means that I'm not using my personal favourite male avatar pairing. Now, if you've been around my channel for a while, you'll probably know what this is, but I'm going to show you again anyway, just in case you haven't. My personal favourite male avatar pairing is Panne, and I may be one of the few people who thinks that. It's definitely not a common opinion. I'm pretty sure by far the most common pairings for male avatar are Cordelia, Tharja, and Lucina. Maybe Tiki as well sometimes. I do quite like Tiki. Tiki is probably my second favourite choice, but Panne is definitely my favourite by a long way. And the reason for that mainly is that she's the last of her kind, and she has a lot of dialogue about not wanting to be alone, and I just really like the fact that with the male avatar, she gets to have a big family. She gets to have 2 children. And basically, yeah, not only that, but her son, Jan, it's just so great giving him a sibling. Well, one, it's completely better than female Morgan supports with non-brother Jan, which is just, ugh. But 2, it just feels really good to me giving Jan a sibling, because he's been completely traumatized from being the last of his kind, and, you know, having a sibling really helps him with that, actually. Not to mention the 2 of them are completely awesome. Also, this is one of the few ways to get Morgan access to a class they don't normally have. In this case, Morgan does inherit the Targwell class, and yes, pairing with either a Targwell or a Manakete is the only way to give Morgan more classes than they would have normally. Apart from Villager, but anyway. Yeah, basically it's one of the only ways to give Morgan access to more classes than they would normally. And so basically I like this for both gameplay and story reasons. I mean, not only that, but with their supports, Panne is one of the only characters who actually likes the avatar's cooking, and that is both hilarious and sweet at the same time. So I like the whole dynamic of this pairing, really. It's just always been my personal favourite, although Tiki is probably my second favourite, again for similar reasons. Because it gives Morgan access to a class they wouldn't have access to normally. But also Tiki has the added benefit of she doesn't have a child of her own normally, so pairing with an avatar is the only way they can have a child. So that is pretty cool too. But those are pretty much my 2, but definitely Panne is my favourite. But since I'm not using a male avatar, that means that I actually can't use that pairing with Panne, which means I'm going to have to pair her with someone else. And that I'll explain later, because I'll be covering the pairings in order of when the female joins. Except for the first one, because Chrom's kind of the main character, and his marriage is kind of really important, so I think it's best to cover him first. My favourite Chrom pairing is Sumia, and the weird thing is, I like this pairing for pretty much the exact same reasons why a lot of people dislike it. Simply put, I like this pairing because it's the one most heavily implied to be canon. That's literally all that matters to me. Now, this may sound really weird, I seem to think quite differently to especially a lot of Western gamers, but me, I'm actually not really big on player choice in game narrative. I actually prefer for there to be one story set in stone that the player doesn't change. And for that reason, I've always been a fan of canonical love interests, even though a lot of people tend to hate them. So for example, characters like Kairi in Kingdom Hearts, who also gets hated a lot, Ninian in Fire Emblem 7 with Eliwood, I kind of like Hector and Lyn, because I think that's the one the story most heavily implies. And even outside Fire Emblem, this is another case that might shock a lot of people. I really like Yukari in Persona 3, and I actually really like the Yukari and Persona 3 protagonist pairing, and the Persona 4 protagonist and Rise pairing. It's just, I tend to naturally gravitate towards liking pairings that have evidence in canon outside of support conversations, and Chrom and Sumia definitely do. Sumia gets a lot of shipping hints in the actual story, outside of support, right from the moment when they first when she's first introduced. And a lot of people argue that female Avatar gets shipping hints in story too. I'm not really so big on that because most of the supposed shipping hints are actually intended to be completely platonic and happen regardless of whether or not they're married to Chrom at all. Whereas Sumia has a definite romantic leaning towards her interactions with Chrom throughout most of the first half of the game until he's forced to marry. And in fact, Sumia's automatic marriage scene, if she has the highest support with Chrom, actually is completely unique. It's much longer than a lot of his other options marriage scenes, and it has a lot of stuff in it that none of the other pairings actually do at all. And yes, I mentioned the auto marriage, not to mention the fact that Sumia does have the highest priority to automatically marry Chrom if there are equal support options, and also he has the fastest support growth with her, and in fact they already start out with a small amount of support points towards each other, so basically, yeah, the game is heavily hinting towards this pairing, and for some reason, this is why a lot of people tend to dislike it. They say, oh, the game's shoving this pairing down your throat. Me, I like that the game does that. I like that one choice is more favoured by the game than the others, because to me, I feel that you can get a more coherent narrative going that way. Again, I have much emphasis over already pre-written stories in games than I do over player-defined narratives. Now, I'm not saying that player-defined narratives, that way of thinking, is completely wrong. It's just not my thing personally. Hence why I really don't like Western RPGs. I have never played anything like Skyrim or Mass Effect, but from what I've seen of them, I really don't like their approach to storytelling. But here's the thing, that's just my personal opinion. If you like those games, I have nothing against you. It's just the way that I think. I prefer having a predefined story that the player has little to no control over. Because, to me, the story in games is more like reading a novel than it is writing one. That's just how I feel, but I'm not saying that you're wrong for thinking otherwise. Again, this is just my opinion. Speaking of opinion, though, one thing that I will say about Chrom and Sumia that I don't like, the localization messed up badly on their support conversations. Really badly. And it's something that actually makes me very angry. The S support in particular. Now, the B support, I'm fine with. Changing bento to pies, it actually makes more sense than the Japanese version, because pies make more sense in a medieval setting. The S support, though, my god, did they go way too far with that. The S support is almost cringe-worthily bad, and to anyone who dislikes this pairing based on the English S support, I highly encourage you to look up the Japanese S support, which is absolutely nothing like the localized version at all. Now, it's weird because in general, I think this game has a fantastic localization, and most of the humour in the localization is top-notch. But sometimes attempts to inject humour into the script when it wasn't there originally can go too far, or in extreme cases, come off as outright offensive. This was definitely that case. They basically turned what originally was only one mention of cooking into a giant pie joke that spanned the entirety of their support conversations, Up to and including their freaking marriage proposal of all things. Yeah, they turned the marriage proposal into a freaking joke about pies. What the hell, localizers? Really? It's just, makes me just so angry. And clearly they were like, oh, this is really hilarious. It seems like a completely good idea at the time. They should have proofread it. They really should have got someone to look into it. And someone should have realized, wait a minute, we're making jokes about her baking pies all the time. That's gonna make people see her as a sexist housewife. And they did. Congratulations, localizers! Good job! Good job! Okay, that's enough of that rant. I'm sorry, I just really don't like the way they handled the S support conversation. Pretty much everyone who's played this game say that Chrom's conversation with Sumia, if he automatically marries her and they don't have an S support, is actually better than their actual S support, which is really saying something. But I still don't see what the localizers were thinking. They just did not think that through. That was just terrible. And again, just the Japanese S support, I'm not being a weeb here and saying, oh, the Japanese version's always completely superior, because in most cases, I like the localization better than the Japanese version in this game. There were just one or two support conversations where they really screwed up, and this was one of them. But anyway, I'll probably be doing this pairing, and... Huh? What was that? I thought I heard something. Let's just go check out the camp for a second. Huh? What's that over? Oh, sweet Naga! So much blood! Oh, how did this happen? Who could have possibly... Oh, fine, Mary Sue, you win. So, yeah, change of plans. Forcibly. Unfortunately, Sumia has been horribly murdered. Thus, Mary Sue is going to become Chrom's waifu for this playthrough. I still suspect foul play was at hand here, but I'm not really one to do anything about it. Mary Sue, of course, has the power to warp canon to her will. I couldn't stop her even if I wanted to, so... she's gonna have her precious Chrom Nom Nom. Now, let me just get this out here for a moment. I am not in any way, if you like the Chrom and female avatar pairing, I'm not intentionally attacking you with this pairing. I personally am not that big a fan of it, mainly because of... well, mainly due to the fact that it's just so common. With male avatars, like I said, you can generally pin down to maybe 3 pairings that are the most common, but at least that's still 3. For female avatars, it's sadly no exaggeration to say that over 90% of them marry Chrom, and I just think that defeats the purpose of the avatar. Like, the purpose of the avatar is that they can marry anyone. So, really, we should be seeing variety in female avatar pairings. But we're not, because they pretty much all marry Chrom. Admittedly, it is the only female avatar pairing that actually affects the story, and it's also, and I actually am annoyed at the designers for doing this, the only pairing that lets the female avatar have 2 children. I really wish there was some way they could have done that without that, because it's just sort of annoying there, but still. But I am saying, I don't have anything against anyone who likes the female avatar and Chrom pairing in general, as long as they don't hate Sumia over it. And just bear in mind, Mary Sue is not intended to be an attack on the female avatar or the female avatar and Chrom's pairing. They are a parody of Mary Sue's, plain and simple. Just the fanfiction cliche, not anything to do with this game specifically. And that's really the main reason why I'm doing this pairing, because Mary Sue, well, she's Mary Sue. Who would she marry besides the main character? Mary Sue has to get involved with the main plot. She has to derail the entire main plot towards herself. Basically, no one but the main character is worthy for her, because she's the most perfect being in existence, and everyone should worship her. So, yes. Again, just bear in mind, no offense to female Avatar fans at all, this was only intended as a parody of Mary Sue's in fanfiction, not, again, female avatars in this game. So as long as we have that out of the way, that's fine. Now, on to the next pairing. I'll be pairing Lissa with Lon'qu, which is what I did in my first playthrough, and in fact what I planned to do before this game even came out. There are several reasons why I like this pairing, mainly because they actually do get a very slight interaction in story that actually has some shipping hints from her side. I didn't know that at the time though, but yeah, when he joins, there is a bit of a thing between him and Lissa, just for one brief moment. The main reason though why I like this is just because Lissa's son looks so much like Lon'qu that it can't possibly be a coincidence. It's kind of like Sylvia and her son. Corporal looks so much like Claude that I just can't pair Sylvia with anyone else. It just makes way too much sense. But yeah, not only that, but Lissa's son's supports with his father are quite interesting because basically, without giving away too much spoilers, something that he mentions happening involving his father is actually really similar to something that Lon'qu does to involving Lissa in their supports with each other. So it's actually quite interesting, the parallels there. But yeah, I mostly like this pairing because, again, story interaction and the fact that her son looks a lot like him. And I mean, her son's a Myrmidon. Why else would he be one? It doesn't really make all that much sense for him to be one in other... I'm not saying that other Lissa pairings don't make sense, mind you. I actually quite like Lissa and Frederick and Lissa and Vake as far as other Lissa pairings go. Lon'qu's just my favourite, but only slightly above those two. I probably would want to pair Lissa with either Frederick or Vake in another playthrough. Next up is Sully, who I'm going to be pairing with Stahl. The reason for this is, well, there was pretty much only one. The moment I first found out that one of the Red Knight, Green Knight duo of this game was going to be female, I knew I had to pair them. That was pretty much it. But within the actual game itself, Stahl and Sully, they have a lot of similarities in their support conversations, and they sort of have a lot to talk over considering they're both knights. And their supports do have some interesting callbacks to the original Marths games, and kind of discuss the Cain and Abel archetype, interestingly enough. Also, Stahl is stated to be a good cook, which will definitely be a good balance considering that Sully is a terrible cook, and her child is even worse than her, as if that was possible, so at least Stahl will be around to actually, you know, give her some tips from time to time. Oh, and considering the similar classes, this pairing actually passes some pretty decent stats on to Sully's child as well. So it's actually pretty good in a lot of ways. Stahl and Sully as a pairing actually has quite a lot of nostalgia to me in a way, because in my first playthrough, these two were the first to reach an S support. Not only that, but these two would very frequently dual guard each other, even before they'd supported at all. Like, they'd be dual guarding each other at something like 3% very frequently. I think I even got 2 dual guards in a row off of one of them when they weren't even a C support, so again, this pairing actually has quite a special place in my heart just for that, like just for what they were doing in gameplay, and again, the fact that they were probably, yeah, they were my first ever S support couples. So yeah. Next we come to Muriel, and this is the first pairing that's going to be changed compared to my first playthrough. In my first playthrough, I paired her with Frederick, mainly because I thought their personalities seemed pretty similar overall. People kind of advised me against this because it didn't give her child very good magic. It did make him a pretty decent Dark Knight though. I didn't really care about this because again, I cared more for story than I did for stats. I was actually completely torn between 2 pairings for her though, and she was the one character where I had this case with. I was actually stuck between her and someone else, and the decision was very, very close, to the point where I said that I'd pair her with Frederick in my first playthrough, but I promised myself that I wouldn't make the other pairing with her in my second playthrough, just because it was that close of a decision. Fortunately, I have the perfect setup for this, because I'm not going to be able to pair her with Frederick in this playthrough anyway. The main reason for that is, for the purposes of just showing off all the side quests, I'm going to be pairing Frederick with Sumia. Now, I'm not going to use Sumia, and I don't plan on using Frederick all that much either, and that's the only reason why I'm pairing him with her. For story purposes, in this playthrough, Sumia is considered to have been murdered off-screen by Mary Sue. So, yes, Sumia is dead, and thus, Sumia's child does not exist. But I will actually pair Sumia with Frederick just so I can show off the side quest chapter, but I will not be using her child at all, because, again, they don't exist. Because of this, I can't pair Frederick with Muriel, and so I'm going to have to use my other pairing. Incredibly dodgy edit, go! yeah, my second choice was pairing Muriel with Libra. And this is the one that most people on forums actually suggested I go with because it does give her child better magic. So this is actually going to help probably more stat-wise than the Frederick one did. The main reason is I actually quite like the supports between these two, and, well, it was more because Libra was the only basically the only magical-leaning father who was available for her at the time. But I actually quite like their supports because it's a really interesting take on the whole science versus religion thing, and actually shows that science and religion don't need to be in opposites all the time. It's actually quite refreshing to see that, and the supports, again, are very, very unique. And you'll be seeing them in the actual playthrough. Not only that, but Libra was one of the quote-unquote forever alone characters in my first playthrough. The male characters who never were paired with anyone. And I felt bad for that, because the thing is, Libra is such a genuinely nice guy. It's kind of weird for me to say that, but there's actually a lot more to his character than just looking like a girl, and I find Libra as a character really interesting because he's just one of the most genuinely nice characters in the entire game, so because of that, I like seeing him paired with someone. So yeah, that's another reason why I'm doing this pairing. So my pairing for this playthrough will be Libra and Muriel. The next female to join is Maribelle, and I'm going to be pairing her with Ricken, which is what I did in my first playthrough. Now, this pairing actually became an unexpected favourite of mine. I really didn't expect to like it so much, but it shot up there as one of my favourite pairings in the entire game. Initially, the only reason why I paired these two was because it basically gave her child the best magic stat possible. That was really the only reason I did it. I was just like, oh hey, magic parent? Other magic parent, Fire Emblem 4 logic. The thing is, I had no idea at the time, but then I actually play the game, or at least see a playthrough of the Japanese version, and I find out that Ricken and Maribelle actually have some pretty major ship teas already in story, without even taking into account their supports. And yes, if you couldn't tell, yes, I like pairings that have evidence in story. That's actually the main thing I look for in a pairing. Just, canon evidence means everything to me, and I didn't realize this, but Ricken and Maribelle really have that. They actually get some interaction outside of supports, well, mainly only when they first join, and there actually is a lot of reason for these two to actually be shipped together, really, as far as the main story goes. Added to the fact that in their final support conversation, Ricken actually mentions that he's always liked her from the moment that he met her. I just really like this pairing. Also, again, it makes their child a very, very good magic user, and the thing was, I never expected to be using their child at all. I really didn't expect to actually get all that much use out of him, because I expected a certain someone to be my main magic user. Thing was, that certain someone ended up, I didn't like their localization. So, I basically had their child as the next best thing, and so, without me even intending it, they became my main magic user, and they did a very, very good job of it. So, yeah, this pairing was the unexpected favourite of mine. I didn't expect to like it so much, but I really did in the end. Oh, that and she's one of the few people who looks a relatively similar age to Ricken. For the most part. Although I will say that I do like the Gaius and Maribelle pairing, just because they have a really interesting history together in supports, but I like Ricken a little bit more. And so, the next female who joins is my wife, Panne, yes. And as you can see here, I'm pairing her with Gaius. The reason for that is, basically, I read Gaius and Panne's supports ahead of time, and immediately I decided, in any pairing where I don't have a male avatar, this is the pairing that I'm doing for Panne. Basically, I decided that completely based on their supports. I just really like their supports. They also join in the same chapter, which is convenient, and the fact that his stats are quite a good fit for her, and give some pretty decent caps to her child. So, yeah, that's pretty much the main reason. I can't say much else about this pairing because I have never actually tried it before, so I guess I'll really form an opinion on it based on what happens in this playthrough. The next character who joins in the main game is Cordelia, and I personally like pairing her with Vake. The main reason why I did this on my first playthrough was because it's basically Chrom's best friend and Sumia's best friend getting together, and I really like the idea of Chrom's best friend helping her get over Chrom, because, spoiler alert, well, everyone knows this, but Cordelia has unrequited love for Chrom, and she can't possibly be paired with him under any circumstances. In fact, they don't even have support, so she has to find someone else, and I personally really like Vague for that. Also, they both have similar personalities in that they're both obsessed with training and making themselves stronger, and that angle in their support was really interesting. Also, I really like how blonde hair looks on their child. That and, this pairing actually does give some surprisingly good gameplay benefits, because the stat caps this passes down are really appropriate for the child's class, and the child also benefits from the axe skills that Vague can pass down too, so I ended up quite liking this one. And the next character who joins is Nowi, and I know I'm being unoriginal here, but I like Donnel and Nowi. Really, I don't hate Nowi violently at all. In fact, I actually quite like her. She's actually one of my favourite characters in the game combat-wise, and even story-wise, I quite like her character and her supports are pretty good. The English localization did a very good job of making her supports a little more appropriate for Western audiences, but while still keeping her character relatively intact, which I really liked and thought that was I really applauded them. Basically, Donnel and Nowi's supports were pretty much exactly how I remember them from reading translations of the Japanese version. But yeah, I really only approve of pairing her with either Donnel or Ricken, because they're the ones who look more close in age to her, and again, as you've seen before, I prefer Ricken and Maribelle, so Donnie is going with her. I really like their supports though overall, and also in battle. These two in battle for me have performed amazingly well. That huge amount of natural defense that they both have together means lots of dual guards, and that is basically, yeah, they've performed very consistently well for me over my playthrough. But not only that though, now I don't normally care about the gameplay benefits of pairings, I prefer more about the story. However, this pairing does give one incredibly good gameplay benefit. And it pretty much all comes from Donnie. Well, firstly there's aptitude, but even ignoring aptitude, Donnie gives a ridiculously good luck cap. What does this do? It means that their child can have a luck stat of 50 or above. Why is that so important? Donnie can also give his children the Arms Thrift skill from the Mercenary class branch. Arms Thrift basically gives a luck times 2% chance of not consuming a weapon use every time you attack with a weapon. You can kind of see where this is going. If you have a luck stat of 50 or above, your weapons are permanently unbreakable. And considering that on a dragon, yep, something that Manakete fans all throughout the series have been wanting for ages. Infinite use dragon stones. Oh yeah, this is gonna be fun. The next female who joins, well, the next pairable female who joins is Tharja, and I'm pairing her with Kellam. And you're all probably thinking, what? At this point? This one's gonna take a while to explain, and is pretty much something that really only I'm gonna get, so here it goes, and this is gonna sound very, very, very bizarre. So, basically, a long time ago, before Awakening was even released in English, I, as much as I'm ashamed to admit it, wrote a bit of a semi-crossover fanfiction. Basically, I got inspired by the fact that Virion looks so much like Miles Edgeworth that I thought, wouldn't it be cool to write an Ace Attorney-style court case that's actually set in the Fire Emblem Awakening world? So, that's what I did, with Virion being the defense attorney, because let's face it, Edgeworth does actually do quite a lot of defense work, despite the fact that he's a prosecutor. Kellam was the victim in my fan case, because pretty much no one would miss him or notice that he was gone. Where does Tharja play into all this? Well, I thought with Kellam being the victim, Tharja really fits for that, you know that character in Ace Attorney games, that witness who's incredibly creepy, really suspicious, has a perfect motive, and yet totally didn't do it. I thought, wouldn't it be perfect for Tharja to be that witness? The one who you really, really suspect as being the killer, but actually she's not, despite the fact that she's acting really suspiciously and has the perfect motive? And I thought, you know, really, to get that to make sense, I'd say that she was engaged to Kellam, and sort of kind of use her yandere tendencies as a possible motive for killing him, if maybe he was talking to another girl. And yes, this was before I knew that Tharja was only yandere for the Avatar. I didn't know that at the time. I thought that she was like that for everyone. So, yeah, you can tell that I wrote this before the game had really officially come out. All I really knew was some vague support translations and, basically just who the characters were. I didn't really know much about the game at all. So that's pretty much how the Kellam and Tharja pairing actually started for me, and then I went and read their support conversations, and surprisingly enough, I actually really genuinely liked them. So what started off as a weird crack pairing for me that I only did to set up a weird crack fanfiction, turned out to actually be one of my more genuinely well-liked pairings. It's one of Tharja's only supports where she never mentions the Avatar at all, and personally, I actually like those pairings. Tharja is a ridiculously controversial character within the fandom. Some people really love her, some people absolutely despise her. I'm more on the ambivalent side. I'm kind of neutral. I don't fall either way. However, I'm not a fan of her and the Avatar. I just don't really like the whole creepy stalker romance. I prefer her supports that have less of the creepy stalker tendencies. The ones where you see her hidden a heart of gold a bit more. And Kellam's, you actually did see a bit more of that with her. Also, pairing her with Kellam, someone who's really unnoticeable, kinda makes a little more sense what ends up happening to their daughter, but I'll not talk about that now for fear of spoilers. In case you're wondering, that weird crossover fan case that I wrote is 100% dead now. It died along with my old computer, and that's probably a very good thing, because if I look back on it now, I would probably think it was terrible. But in case you're wondering, Aversa did it. She was also the judge presiding over the case, which was really interesting, but that's pretty much all I'll say. Next we have something that unfortunately I'm going to be getting a little negative about. Remember how I said that Ricken and Maribelle was my unexpected favourite of the pairings? Well, when I first did my playthrough, I had an unexpected least favourite. There was a pairing that I really liked leading up to the game when I was reading the Japanese supports. Unfortunately, the English localization, I really was not a fan. Yep, this is Henry and Olivia. It started out when one support conversation of theirs was translated on the serenesforest.net forums. I read it and immediately fell in love with the pairing, and a lot of other people did too. In fact, it was probably my favourite support line out of anything that I'd read. And so, then my sister became a massive fangirl of this pairing, and so we were looking forward to the point where we finally got these two and could actually pair them. And we did, and we got their supports, and I read them, and suddenly my opinion on this pairing sunk really low. There's a lot of controversy as to whether or not the supports were actually changed all that much in the localization, or whether or not the original translation was even accurate to begin with. But suffice to say, I did not like the English version of their supports at all. They just really played up Henry's creepiness for black comedy rather than tragedy, and I just hated that. And in fact, Henry became my least favourite character in the entire game, and by the time I got them to the S support, I honestly wished I hadn't. I really regretted it. I heavily regretted it. The thing is though, I actually really did like how their child turned out. It gave them a lot of good options and as far as skills go, and honestly I feel that personality-wise, Olivia's child makes a lot of sense with Henry as their father, because their personality is actually quite similar to Henry's in a lot of ways. But I still couldn't get over how much they turned Henry into a heroic comedic sociopath, a character archetype that I just can't stand at all. I just really don't think bloodshed should ever be played for comedy. And because of that, I intend to pair Olivia with someone else this playthrough. And that someone else is Gregor. Now, this is sort of weird, and the thing is, I haven't even seen their supports. The problem, though, is this is really the only person who I could pair her with that wouldn't involve massive reshuffling of everyone else. Gregor was pretty much one of the only options that I had left by this point. In fact, he may have been literally the only option left besides Henry. So, I kind of have to do this. The annoying thing is, in terms of what classes this passes down, this may be the single worst option for Olivia, because all of Gregor's class options, Olivia's child already inherits anyway, so Gregor contributes nothing to the pairing as far as classes go. And that's annoying. The main reason why I'm doing this, though, is because I never used Gregor in my first playthrough, which is weird because I really like his character. I like how the English localization managed to turn someone who was really bland and generic originally into one of the most hilarious characters in the game, and I really liked that. Gregor was actually really cool, and I was annoyed that I didn't get to use him much. Basically, him, Gaius, and Libra were the forever alone males in my first playthrough, and in this playthrough, I want to give them all more screen time because I didn't in my first playthrough, so this is what I'm going to do. And again, I'm not really sure about these supports, but I think I read somewhere that Olivia and Gregor's supports do feature the line, "Gregor's leg fell off once, but he sewed it back on." Yeah, which is kind of awesome. And now we come to the last of the first generation females, at least those that have predefined children. And so, yes, again, I'm going with the unoriginal option, but I am pairing Cherche with Virion. I like this pairing mainly because of the fact that Cherche and Virion actually knew each other long before the events of this game. They've actually known each other for quite a long time, and again, I tend to like that in pairings. Basically, Cherche knows just how much of a womanizer he can be, and she's one of the few people who can actually control that, mostly thanks to her wyvern. So, I think she'll be able to keep his womanizing tendencies in check. That, and again, they've known each other for a long time, and that's really the main reason. I can't say much more about that because the reasons why they know each other is actually a bit of a spoiler for this game. I'll just say Virion turns out to be a lot more important to the plot than you would think for someone of his character at first, and that's kind of interesting, so I'd rather you all see that for yourselves. Oh, and this also gives Cherche's child, who is also a wyvern rider, easy access to the Bowbreaker skill, which, yeah, plus 50% evasion against bows for a flying unit is an amazing thing to have. And that's it for my discussion on pairings. You might have noticed that I didn't mention any second generation pairings here. Well, one, if I did, the video would take way too long, and two, second generation pairings, just like Fire Emblem 4, are nowhere near as important as first generation pairings. Second generation pairings, the only benefit to them is just pure gameplay. So, because of that, and again, second generation pairings are also entirely optional. You don't miss out on anything by not pairing second gen characters. Because of that, I will make some second gen pairings, and there are some that I really like above others. But I'll be talking about those separately when I actually get to them, because I don't think they really require a heads up, because they don't really affect the plot in any way, and they're much less important than first-gen pairings. First-gen pairings are something that you will always see on every playthrough. Second-gen pairings are entirely optional and don't really do all that much. So, yeah. I'll discuss those in the actual playthrough itself. So, I hope you've enjoyed my discussion of the pairings that are my personal favourites that I intend to do in this playthrough, and I will see you next time when we actually get things started. So, see you then when Fire Emblem Awakening begins. And sadly, Mary Sue makes her dramatic comeback. Naga help us all.